We are now live with the live Hangout on Air, the dialogue on community. Okay, I just had to turn off YouTube reading back my words to me on about a 4 or 5 second delay. That's how much time it takes, I guess, for the content to go from me to YouTube to me again. So now I need to find it back again. Here we go, Google Hangouts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link where you can join into the chat here. And so there it is. It's in the chat for the video area. And for those of you who are working with other forms of chat, so okay, I put it into the Grasshopper chat. And now where else do I want to put it? I want to put it on the viewer page. So it would have been better to put that there before, right? Okay, so let me do that. I should have probably started this up before actually starting this up. Anyhow, if you've already seen the link, jump in at any time. And, of course, activity slides. Link that I said would be active once the session starts will be active in just a couple of seconds. Page, publish page. All right, so if you reload your viewer, specifically that lower frame in the viewer, you can see it. Finally, I'm going to tweet it. So for those of you who don't have access to any of this, you can see it on Twitter. So EL30 again on Hangout Live. Paste the link into Twitter. Okay, so now that's been posted on Twitter, and I'll also post it into Mastodon because I'm bilingual. All right, and now it's been posted in Mastodon. So there we go. Now this is the point in the Hangout where I call the War of 1812 started in when? Anyone? Bueller? Right. I don't have anyone joining in just yet. I don't have a plan for what to do when people don't join in. But I have some things that I can do. So let me review, first of all, just what the task was. Right? And the task was really simple. I asked participants in the course to create a community. Really, that was all, right? Now, if I had been nasty, I might have said something like, create a community, but don't use any centralized tools to do it. So, because a few people used a Google document in order to organize the community that they tried to build. And that was a pretty good idea. But if I had said, no centralized tool at all, then you wouldn't be able to use Google Docs. But, I didn't use, a tool that's centralized to the course. Right? I didn't set up a web page, eLearning 3.0 MOOC community web page and say, this is the community, come and join it. And so what I tried to do here then is to set up the situation where there's no obvious way for anyone to know whether or not they're in the community. And that's what makes it tricky. Even if you have a centralized thing like Google Documents. And if we had more people in the course, if we had hundreds of people participating instead of ones of people participating, I could easily have envisioned a situation where 2 or 3 different people might start up their own Google Docs. So we'd have community A, community B, community C, all vying to become the course community, because I did specify there could be only one community. Right? And then what do you do? Then how do you choose? And that sets up the same sort of problem that we have when we're trying to solve for consensus generally. Think about it. What's a fact of the matter? Did Donald Trump say we're going to build a border wall, or did Donald Trump say we're going to build a border fence? Just to pick things at random, right? So one website might say Donald Trump said he's going to build a border wall. Another website might say he's going to build a border fence. Which one does the community accept as a fact? It's the same kind of problem. Now, there's a bit of a difference in the case of the Donald Trump thing, we would think, in the sense that we can refer to something external to tell us which of these facts we should accept. For example, we could refer to a video recording of Donald Trump saying there's going to be a border wall. And we have a guest. But the question is, what happens when we don't have this external thing we can refer to? So we have Roland joining us. Do I need to do things to bring him in? Probably. Well, maybe not. I can't tell.
Well, I don't think so. Do you hear me?
Oh, I hear you fine.
Okay, that's great. And I have to turn the camera on. Okay, here I am. Okay.
Yeah, I see you. I hear you. The only question I ask is, are people out there in the world hearing you and seeing you? I see no indication that they're not, so I assume that they are.
Okay. I don't. I'm just here for about 10 minutes because I'm at a newsroom and it's 6 p.m. here, so it's a busy time. But I told them that I had a very important meeting, so I can join for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay, that sounds great. So you attempted the consensus task, right?
Yes, I did. So I went for a kind of a minimal viable thingy, just asking people to express themselves, and in a first round and maybe in a second round to comment on each other's posts. Okay, that's also very simple, I must admit, but it had some effect. People did respond, and so that's a good thing. But I can imagine that you have more ambitious ideas about what we could have done.
Actually, the opposite is true.
Okay.
I had less ambitious ideas about what we could have done. No, I don't mean that as harshly as it sounds. But when I think about what is the minimal viable way to create a community, right? I'm thinking of what's the least commitment possible. Because even the community that you guys formed ultimately you created as a membership criterion the task of writing about your experiences in the course.
And you could say that maybe just lurking would be enough, for instance, that you don't have to do that. Just being there could be sufficient.
Well, we would need some evidence that you were there, right? The people, but I mean, of course, a person in their own blog post, say, could simply, point to that Google document and say, yeah, I'm a member of this. But I was thinking even simpler, and having nothing to do with the content at all. It could have been completely mechanical, where one person writes a post saying, this is the starting point for the community. Anyone who links to this post is a member of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That would have worked, right? And then
Yes.
other people could decide whether or not to link to the community. It would have been a very simple thing. Or another thing I thought might be possible was somebody might have suggested, here's a hashtag, EL30 community. Hashtag EL30 community.
Yeah, I thought about that one. Yes.
Yeah. And then anybody who posts this hashtag is a member of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have worked too. So, I was a bit surprised and a bit not surprised when the task became, write about your experience, where, there was something that you actually, performative that you actually had to do that was really fairly complex.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. And so now you have a kind of a subset of participants who are actually writing, and another group who is maybe feeling a bit guilty or not really a member of the community because they, for whatever reason, they don't post about it. Yeah. So,
and what would have been interesting is if one of those alienated people, we'll call them that, right, yes, had said, well, I don't like this, I'll just use the simple hashtag method.
Mm-hmm.
Then how do we decide which is the one community?
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah, fair enough.
How would we decide? Any thoughts?
Well, I would go for the minimal solution, really. The hashtag would. Mm-hmm. But even then, you could say this would exclude those who maybe for very ideological or ethical reasons would refuse to use Twitter, would say, well, I'm only on Mastodon, for instance, and I will put my hashtag there, maybe other people won't see it. And so you would still have this kind of an issue, because you have the fragmentation of online social spaces. People are becoming very principled about it, to say, well, now I'm never on Facebook. Twitter is something which is still tolerated, but even so, you have Mastodon as a competitor, which is supposed to be more ethical, less data hungry, etc. And I guess that's true also, but so you risk to, it's difficult to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah.
If even you would want that. Maybe one should ask, why even talk about a community? Or or to make it, or why even make a topic about it? Because people could just say, well, I'm a lurker, I won't put any hashtags, but still I like it what those guys are doing, or maybe they don't like it, but they are still interested.
Mm-hmm.
And so is a reader of a book part of the community of the readers of the book, even when that person never writes about it, for instance?
Sure, exactly. So the reason why I put this into the context of truths and facts is because on a society-wide basis, we're facing pretty much that same question. The question of how do we know we belong to such and such a community also boils down to the question of how do we know that such and such fact, quote unquote, is actually a fact? Because you have competing communities. The community that supports one fact, Donald Trump says we're going to build a wall, and the community of people that supports the other fact, Donald Trump said we're going to build a fence. How do we pick? Which one is the one?
And how do we meet? How do we meet each other?
Yeah, and how do we meet each other? And so that's why, really, I've said in the past, I think that the problem of fake news is a consensus problem rather than, say, a verification problem or anything like that. Not in the sense that consensus would tell us whether or not it's true, but in the sense that for me and you to have any sort of interchange at all, any sort of dialogue at all, we're going to have to accept, even if for the sake of argument, some facts. You think that's right?
Yes. I think the first thing is that we both have to consider the issue at stake important or relevant to enter into the discussion, to even want to think about it.
Sure.
And then I think that's the very first step. And then the second one is a kind of openness which goes beyond the facts and the arguments. I think that there is an element of empathy needed, because what people consider to be true is often a kind of a disguise for something very different, for being a fan or of deriving meaning from the fact that there are Trump people or anti-Trump people. And they are members of kind of soccer teams or football teams, and whatever happens, they will stay loyal because it's part of their identity. And if your facts are very convincing, then it threatens their identity, and they will do everything to block it. So I think the first thing we should try to achieve is that people feel somehow recognized and safe, in order to lower the guards and to be able to even consider that there are other facts there which might challenge some facts they cherish. And I'm not sure how to do that. And I'm also wondering whether the distributed web we have been discussing and experimenting with, whether this will make this actually more difficult. Because one can be very critical, and rightly so, about Facebook, for instance, but it's still one technical platform. You could imagine that you have a kind of a huge Facebook group of people of both sides meeting each other, finding some methodology to come to a kind of a preliminary understanding, just to listen to each other, maybe not to start arguing each other into pieces, but just having a meeting there. But if you don't have Facebook kind of entity, that you have all those different platforms in the space of the distributed web, well, you won't even meet each other, maybe. I'm not sure. It's a bit... I was, for instance, I wanted to put a blog text on Google Docs saying, well, this is heresy, of course. And you said, yes, indeed, it is. which is true. But I was wondering, well, where should I put it? I could put it on an IPFS platform thingy, so that people could find it there. It would be difficult to react on it, I think, to modify the text, but I could have done something like that. But okay, you have the tribe of the IPFS people. Then you have the bigger browser, which is not playing nicely with IPFS, which is another tribe. And the advantage of the big capitalist internet companies is they are so big that everyone looks at them and can eventually tell them to correct certain things they are doing in a very they're not doing very well these days. You have the guys of Google being interrogated by politicians. You have Facebook guys being asked by parliaments all over the planet now to come and explain themselves, which is in itself maybe a very good thing. While if you have your small community, very distributed, very autonomous, no one will ask anything, but maybe there will be even worse in spreading fake news, hate messages, etc. So I'm this kind of founding a community, even on a very simple basis. I don't think that in itself will be solved by the distributed web, and that maybe it could even become more difficult to achieve. I don't know what you think about that.
So there's a couple of thoughts I have. First of all, I'm going to agree with you that the distributed web, in certain ways, actually makes this harder. Um, I think a lot of things are harder with the distributed web. Even setting up basic communications, security, all of that sort of stuff. The technology is a pain to work with. There's a whole bunch of things. I've tried to build Grasshopper as a distributed learning system. So each person has their own instance of Grasshopper, which is, kind of trying to make it like a distributed LMS, if you will, or a distributed MOOC. This is hard. It's a lot easier to build a centralized thing and have everybody come to the centralized thing.
Yeah.
So you might ask, well, why would I do that? And the reason why is that that's where I think we're headed no matter what we want. I don't think it's feasible to imagine that there would be one world Facebook or one world Google. Even now, we have the division and all the problems of interoperability between the world of Apple and the rest of the world. On platforms, Apple versus Windows, mobile, Apple versus Android. We've seen similar things in the gaming world where people playing Fortnite, for example, Sony just wouldn't allow their players to interoperate with other platforms. We're also seeing it nationally, with the division between, say, Amazon and Alibaba. Right? So, one Chinese world, one Western world, and that's only going to magnify over time. Indian platforms. So we're in a distributed world. And I take that as a fact. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is having a single platform doesn't actually solve the problem, and in many cases makes it worse. Even within Facebook, single platform, we have the same sort of problems happening. People don't dialogue. We get fake posts. We get robot posts. We get influence. The influence of elections, things like that. Everything is infused with advertising. We have a lot of tracking and surveillance, which is then used for nefarious purposes. So, I think that if you have to choose between a centralized system and a decentralized system, in certain senses, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we don't have a chance to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And this is especially true, and I think this is why decentralized approaches have flourished here in financial communities. And in financial communities, they don't care about empathy
Mm-hmm.
or any of that stuff. The robots don't care about empathy either. And
No.
I think that while it's true that if we had empathy for each other, then we could succeed in having this dialogue. I think it's also true we're not going to have this empathy. Just not going to happen. I'm sad to say, and I'd rather that we were empathetic to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But we're in a world of 7 billion people. It's really hard to be empathetic with each and every one of them, and it's really hard to trust each and every one of them. And in fact, especially when we don't know if the person we're interacting with even exists.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think that the approaches that characterize a decentralized system are going to be important in informing the way we can find community in the future. Does that make sense to you? Does that seem reasonable?
Yes, it's a kind of a bleak
Yeah.
vision. And as a journalist, I understand it because that's what I'm confronted with each and every hour or minute. You have it everywhere. You see endless discussions. You have the French, for instance, where
Yeah.
they are doing good things in order to mitigate the climate change. But then again, you have an uprising at the countryside of people who are saying, "How dare you make it so expensive to use my car?" Because they need their cars to bring their children to school, to go to the supermarket, etc. So that's and there's a real uprising going on. There is no empathy at all. They're just destroying Paris in order to fight for having cheaper fuel for the cars. So you have the Brexit discussion. So in Europe, you have it in the United States. I don't. Canada seems to be pretty peaceful, I must say, after all the communitarian issues there were with Quebec and the rest of the country. But maybe that will change as well too. So you have it planet-wide. So the issue is, how do you come to a? Is it or will it be possible to come to a consensus, to a feeling that actually we are a kind of a planetary community, that our planetary file system actually corresponds to the feeling that we are all one humanity, and that if tomorrow there is some meteorite going to crash the planet, maybe even the Russians and Trump and everyone will unite in order to do something to avert a disaster. Do we really have to be confronted with that kind of an immediate cosmic threat, or will it be possible to come to our senses without such a calamity presenting itself? And I think it is somehow I maybe we are being too negative about it also. But all the things I mentioned now, all the discussions and the riots, etc., and terrorism, it all exists. But on the other hand, I see that humanity is probably far more peaceful today than it ever was before. We are getting upset if people get into trouble or are being mistreated at the other side of the planet, there is this idea of human rights, even if it's challenged philosophically and politically, it is there in the mind of many people. There is this Rosling guy, with his statistics showing how you could also, of course, we are hardwired to look at negative news, something I also feel as a journalist, that people respond to negative news. If you say, if you bring positive news, well, we are just hardwired to ignore that.
Right.
And maybe there is this kind of growing empathy if you look at the right questions. If you look at the symbols and like Trump against or pro-Trump, you get different answers and reactions. But when you talk about the challenges of the consequences of climate change, for instance, I think everyone will agree that something needs to be done. It's also an issue of presentation. But once you start to formulate it in a way that it's adversarial, it becomes a problem. But I think in essence, I think most people can be trusted. I think most people are very able to enter into the mind of their fellow humans. But we just have to find the ways how to do it.
Yeah. I'm on the positive side, actually. Believe it or not. I agree with you that, because it seems empirically true, that the world is better now than it has been. Although it's certainly got its glaring weak spots. Yemen springs to mind, for example. Syria springs to mind, for example.
Yeah.
Myanmar. Yeah, I mean, you look back where we were, say, a century ago, we're doing pretty well.
Yes, for instance, take the Brexit. We had horrendous armed conflict between France, Europe, and Great Britain. And these days, what we have are very nasty discussions, but it's very civilized. It's very civilized, and actually, I think young people in Great Britain they would like to have all this Brexit thing removed, but no one will start killing other people for Brexit, for or against. So that is a kind of a very good development if you take some distance and look at it. So there is this idea, well, there is an issue and we have deep feelings about it, but we will discuss it. And one way or another, we will reach a decision and maybe we will deplore it, but it will be a civilized decision, which in itself is fantastic that we are able to do this.
It is fantastic. Now we could talk, and ultimately we probably will, about why that has come to be the case. And certainly in Europe, although there is still a lot of nationalism, it seems to me one of the things that made Europe possible, the European Union possible, is that people in Europe were able to get past their own nationalism and to see themselves as diverse parts of something larger. And so, in a sense, Europe works because it's decentralized. I know it sounds ironically wrong, given the bureaucracy that's developed around the European Commission, etc. But nonetheless, when I attend European Union events, there's a multitude of languages spoken. Usually English, but a whole bunch of other languages. Documents are all in like a dozen different languages, etc. So there is that sense of allowing for diversity, allowing for disunity. So, and it's again not coincidental that Europe began as an economic community. It wasn't based on empathy and kindness and things like that. It was
But it
based
was
on
based on the horror of the Second World War, of course, and they
yeah,
were very. That was the first reason to do it. And of course, it was very pragmatic to say, well, let's tackle the economics first and
yeah,
the market regulations. But
exactly.
the underlying reason was we never again want to end up with millions of people dead in the streets.
Right. And that's a good reason. But
Yes.
the methodology is really instructive here. And that's why, when I come back to talking about decentralized communities in general, I look at blockchain because that methodology again is being emulated, right? They're starting with the practical, the commercial, the things where,
Yes.
the things where we don't need so much empathy to make this work. And they're attempting to build a system where consensus, however defined, could be achieved even in the absence of
Mhm.
empathy and trust and all of that. And if that can be accomplished, and I think it can, that's why I'm working on this, then it becomes possible to layer in the other elements above it, and the other elements being, the aspects of community that we've become more familiar with. Um, you know, while avoiding the excesses of conflict, of what I like to call bad actors. That's the other thing you point out that I agree with. Most people are trustworthy. Most
Mhm.
people are good. I mean, everywhere I've been, people have been good.
Of course.
Everywhere, you know. Um, And that's true in an economy generally. That's true in a society generally. Most people driving on the roads want to follow the rules of the road because if you don't, people die.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, but there are bad actors. And in the case of Facebook, a bad actor can take down the system.
Yeah.
Um, in the case, and that's one of the pushes toward a decentralized system is to build in resistance to bad actors.
Mhm.
So, in a sense, everything being harder is a good thing because when it's too easy, then it becomes very possible for a bad actor to destabilize the system.
Yes. I agree with that. Yeah. And I think the bad actor can. There's a kind of a dialectic in history, I think. We become more and more powerful as individuals and small groups, and you have bad actors manipulating elections, which is a very bad thing. But
Mm-hmm.
one could imagine bad actors being able to manipulate nanotechnology, for instance,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's a bit science fiction like, but maybe 20 years from now it will be no longer, it will be very feasible for small groups to or to manipulate genetic code in such a way that people are affected with certain genetic characteristics. Um, so you have this kind of horrendous possible developments which are no longer something which only a big state can do, but which small group of peoples or even individuals can do. So if you have an all-powerful individual, what you seem to need is a kind of an all-powerful surveillance state, because each and every citizen can be a major risk.
Right.
And so
And
they have to look at me and at you and at all other people. And as soon as we begin to do strange things, strange search operations and following weird combinations of MOOCs, there will be alarm bells. And they will say, well, maybe they want to blow up humanity or destroy London or destroy, I don't know. And that's another thing which puzzles me. because I'm all for privacy and encryption, etc. And I think that a lot of what NSA is doing is actually making the world less safe rather than safer. On the other hand, I do understand people in the intelligence communities who are awake at night and wondering, well, what's happening these days? Terrorism is very limited. It's just okay. They shoot some people at Strasbourg. They have just killed a few people there.
Mm-hmm.
But if they could, they would just wipe out the complete city. I'm sure of it, because you have bad actors in that sense as well. And so, how badly do we need encryption? Do we really want communication to be completely unbreakable by police, authorities, etc.? That's another element of the discussion, I think, and I don't know what to think about. I'm just not so convinced that total encryption and total um, managing your own data in the sense of being able to do whatever you want without any possibility for the state to have a look at what you're actually doing. I know it sounds horrible to say, maybe for many people, it's not very progressive, but I wonder whether it's a good idea.
And there
Mhm.
is this tension, and I've felt this tension before, between openness and privacy.
Yes.
And generally I fall on the side of openness. I grew up in a small town. I live
Yes.
in a small town. There
Mhm.
is no privacy, so
Mhm.
maybe I'm more comfortable with that. But I think openness is a big part of it. We've got another person joining us, um, Armando, who so far exists only as a picture. Oh no, now he's a person, and now he's
Yeah.
gone. That was sudden. uh, yeah, I mean, I hear the calls for privacy all the time, and I do think it needs to be balanced out with openness as well to a certain degree. Um, a good case in point is the GDPR,
Yes.
the forgotten or right to be forgotten, where an individual can remove references to themselves from databases.
Mhm.
Which is a good thing. It allows control over personal data, but we both know that it's not a universal thing, in the sense that, for example, a person can't remove themselves from a country's criminal record system. At least I
Yes.
don't think so, right? Or if a person spent, €1,000 on a couch, they can't undo that transaction.
Mhm.
That transaction exists. It's a fact, and they can't use privacy laws to just make that go away and give themselves back their €1,000 and keep the couch. So there are those sorts of limits as well.
Yes, but there's of course a difference between having your data out there for everyone to use and manipulate, and
Mhm.
having them out there just because, well, there's no other way than having them. If I sell you something, we both will have some record of the fact that we did that transaction. The other thing is, does the rest of the planet need to know that we did this? Maybe the government should know because we have to pay taxes on it. But
Right.
it's a balance. It's always this balance. And what I was at a forum of Blockstack, investigating all kinds of decentralized stuff, and there I could not find any balance. Maybe I entered at the wrong moment in the discussion, but the people who were intervening at the forum, it was really the kind of 100% libertarianism,
Right.
saying state intervention is evil, while This was about this group. How is it called? Gap, I believe. A group where you had hate messages and very sexist memes and stuff like that. And they said, how can we make sure that it can never be eliminated? This group, so that to make sure that people can doing this is and blockchain might be a solution, maybe networked solutions, so avoiding a host which could be tackled by the government. Then again, I think that expressions, what we write, what we video or text, are actually speech acts.
Right.
And the speech act can be a good thing, but it can also be, it can hurt people. It has consequences in the real world. We saw that in Africa, in Rwanda.
Yeah.
We see that in Myanmar. We see it. People start killing each other because they go crazy because of what they are actually reading. So I'm not convinced, for instance, that the government should never be able to say, well, guys, sorry, but this is going, you have to stop publishing this stuff because you're just provoking a civil war here. And it's very difficult to defend these positions in libertarian circles, and often those libertarian circles are very involved with all things blockchain and cryptocurrency, for instance. And that's one of the things which fascinate me. That's this historic linkage between blockchain, cryptocurrency, cyberpunk, and anarchism and stuff like that. The political ideology behind it.
Yeah, there's a straight line there. And there's no doubt that we see the libertarian tendencies in the cryptocurrency world. And it's funny because, ironically, when you have a cryptocurrency regime, there are many more ways in which it can be governed than if you have a regime based on, the exchange of physical tokens like cash.
Mm-hmm.
Because at least in principle, in a digital world, everything is observable. Especially in a blockchain world, right? The entire blockchain is observable. By contrast, when you mint and issue $100 bill or €100 bill, it's gone. You can't track it after that. And so that's why the $100 bill has become the currency of the underworld. And we have Matthias Melcher joining us.
Yes.
I think he'll stay.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
So,
hello?
Yeah, there we go. We've got a good view of your forehead and ceiling.
Hello. I just wanted to ask if you have seen that there is much in the back channel. Questions from Jenny on the back channel.
Oh, geez, no, I haven't even been looking. Hang on.
No.
I'm really terrible at this. I have to find it now. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, oh, geez. So we got some good questions here for discussion. So one question she asks, is the natural behavior of people to converge into one space? What do you think? Oh, and she's asked this a number of times, I guess.
Oh,
the comment box is terrible. I'm sorry, Jenny. You're right. The comment box isn't great.
So it's a natural behavior of people to converge to one place.
One space.
One space, okay.
So what do you think?
It's a bit like the network effect. So I guess I think it's also what Richard Florida is saying about cities, the importance of cities, of course, that people tend to flock to certain centers, even though they could these days do so many things, just staying wherever they are and using video conferencing and other communication tools, but still you see that people want to flock together in Silicon Valley or in London or for Montreal for everything artificial intelligence related. So there is this tendency, I think, to go to common spaces, even physical spaces. Not to, and maybe it's so yes.
See, I think if we think about it, right, take your typical classroom. So it's the first day of the year. Suppose you have a classroom with 100 seats, and you have 30 people in the class. They're not all going to clump into one space. They're going to distribute themselves pretty much equally across the whole space of the classroom. Maybe clumping in the back a bit. In any land area or any physical area, people will disperse to occupy that entire area. And there may be some clustering.
There will be clustering, yes.
Yeah, there will be clustering, and any study of geography will show that, and they'll actually show that it's actually clustering in a reasonably predictable pattern.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But there's also distribution. It's not evenly distributed. And I think that's true just in terms of space generally, when we think of space as a concept rather than the physical construction, like an idea space, for example. There will be, pick a topic, any topic, people won't naturally converge to a single point of view on that topic. Yes, there will be clustering, but ultimately they will fill the entire spectrum of views on that topic. That's also true.
That was a nice thing I observed at this very first MOOC in 2008. You had this clustering. There were the spaces of all kinds of teams, and you had clusters of people. Some were very much aligned with the kind of the main axis of the course. Others were doing their own thing with occasional meeting the big part of the course, the central part of it, if you want. I think that was a very nice experiment to observe that, how the distribution and the clustering.
Yeah, there was enough people in the course that could happen, and there could be clusters on Google Groups and in Second Life, as well as clusters of people discussing different aspects of different topics.
Yes.
This course, we didn't make it over that magic number, Dunbar's number. So, well, we did just slightly in terms of newsletter reading, but really everybody in the course can read everything posted by everybody else in the course.
Yes.
Which is nice because it creates this, like just doing that makes you part of the community. But we don't get this dispersion and cluster effect that we did in the original MOOC, which is too bad because some of the things that we did as tasks in this course would have worked, I think, much more effectively with the population.
Yeah. So I was also wondering, I have a question for you also. So you want to repeat the course in fall, I believe, in the fall of 2000?
Maybe, I'm not sure exactly when yet, but I'm definitely going to repeat it in 2019. So I'm thinking I've got I might throw up bad phrase, a version of connectivism and learning in winter of 2019. I have a bunch of videos that I created with the Federico III University in Naples, and that would make a really nice distributed MOOC.
Okay. Yeah.
And then after that, so maybe starting late spring, somewhere in there, I might start up the another version of or not CCK of this course.
Because I was wondering whether the idea of a community of practice would be feasible or interesting at all. I don't know, of people wanting to explore this further, because we tackled a lot of different things. The Jupyter notebooks, for instance, is one aspect. The distribution stuff, the various technologies, which are all developing different senses. But so there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to experiment. And so it would be nice to have at least some people wanting to keep in touch and exchange whatever experiments they're doing.
Absolutely, and I mean I'm going to be definitely continuing with this work, just in a generic sense, because I think it's important. So, and my MOOCs don't have to be the only place where this discussion happens. There is a community out there that's interested in a lot of this stuff, and it partially includes a number of people from the days of 10 years ago who were working on MOOCs and the whole idea of open online learning. And then there's a bunch of people who are looking at some of the newer developments, indie web and all of that.
Yes.
Web mentions. So there isn't a single united community. I'm noticing that. The different topics in the course, I'm actually touching on very different communities. But I agree. There is,
There's also this a group of people. I also participated in courses which were not MOOCs but online courses by Howard Rheingold. These were typically about 20 people getting together once a week for a synchronous session. It was a more centralized platform, which has advantages and disadvantages. You had a forum, a kind of video conferencing module. You had a bookmark section and a wiki section, and also a blog section, all on the same platform. And it was not free. You had to. It was a modest fee, but there was a fee to be paid. And so these people, actually, part of them, because everyone has their own projects, of course. Part of them is now working on the pedagogy project, which is a kind of a handbook. It is a handbook they developed. I wrote a chapter about MOOCs in the handbook based on my experiences from 10 years ago and from reading your newsletter. And so they are still very active in trying to find out how to organize peer-to-peer learning in a MOOC, or not necessarily always in a MOOC, but often in MOOC-like conditions. How to organize it without being a university or without being a famous professor, just peer-to-peer, saying, well, I have this weird fascination for that kind of culture and the backgrounds of it. Maybe there are some other people on the planet sharing the same fascination. How can we learn together? A very simple question and a very complicated answer, of course.
So I am looking. Sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
No, that was it.
So I am watching the comments in the activity space. So I see that Laura has joined us. Hi, Laura. And Jenny is asking, for a community of practice, would we need a centralized space? And that's a good question. he also points out that Howard's course was quite structured, unlike
Yes,
this
it
one,
was.
which was a mess, but a happy mess.
No, it was quite structured as well. So.
It was. It was structured in a different way, though. Well, I say that not having attended Howard's course, so it could be that his was structured exactly the same, but I doubt it. The interesting thing is, can this be done without famous professors at the university? That's a harder question. Um, I've I've seen even in distributed or decentralized community, there's often an attractor. And in Howard's course, he's the attractor, right? In the original CCK course that we ran, that brought in so many people, George was the attractor, and of course, the course was available for credit at the University of Manitoba. Some people actually got credit for that course. George did all the marketing.
Maybe that was important too, huh? The credit aspect.
I don't know. Certainly, because there was this core group of people that you could count on to be there, that that created enough of a gravity well, if you will, to bring in or attract other people. Similarly, with Jim Groom's DS 106 course, which have been, and I've followed a lot of what he's done in this course, especially the tasks set up. Again, it's based out of a university course at Mary Washington University as a certain core group of people we're going to be there week after. This MOOC doesn't have that in the sense that there's no university, there's no accreditation. There is a core group, but that was a good thing that happened as opposed to a bunch of people trying to get course credit. There's a bit of a difference there. So it may be, it's probably the case, that you need something to instigate or start or create an attractive force, even to create or build a decentralized network or distributed community. Blockchain needed it in the form of digital currencies and transactions. And you find these digital currencies where there's no possibility of transaction, they just here. If they're not, the coins aren't being used for anything, nobody cares. The other, where we run into difficulty, I think, is on the other side, where these central points become too concentrated, and you get things like Facebook and Twitter, where everybody is drawn to this single central.
Yes.
And that's where I think we need to find the limits to it. I think.
Or maybe the design should take into account the possibility that the course is limited to, it's not massive, because even Howard's course, there were maybe 20 people there, and of those 20 people, typically you had about 10 who are really active, and the others which were less active. And so that's not very massive. So this is maybe a bit of a design issue then, that to take into account the fact that, well, maybe there won't be 500 people or 1,000 people which will cluster in very fascinating subgroups, but a core group of people which will, well, more or less focus on the same things, because there's only 10 or 15 of them available. So that would be the other possibility. Of course, it's nice to have both. I think if you have a small or intimate group, it can be very interesting. If you have this huge group of thousands or a few thousands of people, well, why not? It would make for a different structure, I guess.
Yeah.
It would need a different structure, but it's something one can, I guess, predict a bit. Indeed, if there are very big attractive forces or not, but both are valuable, both are important, I think.
Yeah, because there are going to be spaces where the attractive forces are very strong. Brexit is an example, right? There are millions of people interested in this topic in one way or another, for good or bad. So this isn't a course; it's a massive social event. But just keeping with the dialogue on community, right? It's still the same dynamics at play here, right? You can't just say, well, we'll limit the number of people involved in the discussion on Brexit to 20 people. Just a non-starter, right? But at the same time, it's like somebody, I think Jenny said, the fear is, there will be, they're worried about riots. You got a mass of 100,000 people crowded into Trafalgar Square who are very angry. You get that sort of danger. Now, the way, and now I was going to say, and then I caught myself, the way I would design it, Dennis, I would make it so that you couldn't, you don't have Trafalgar Square. You don't have a space where 100,000 people can gather. But then on the other hand, that's not a good thing either. That's why I stopped myself. But I don't think the answer is that simple.
No.
And Jenny's asking also, the small courses, would it be open? Well, of course, it wouldn't be open, right? Howard's course wasn't open.
No, it wasn't. No.
And openness is important. Access is important in both courses and community, right? If we shut out people from the community dialogue process, that's not a solution to our social woes. I don't think. Well, I'm thinking this is probably a good space to leave it. I want to thank everybody who participated in that consensus task, and that task will be repeated. It will be like when I do the course next time. I'm going to keep all the original tasks and maybe add new tasks so that people have options or alternatives. So there will be an opportunity to try that task again. I don't know, in 5 months' time, something like that. I'll be curious to see how that works out. Of course, I might have 5 people in the course the second time. You have to live with that risk, I guess.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much for organizing this course. It's really very valuable to me, and I'm sure for other participants as well. And thank you for the newsletter you make and all the other stuff. It's very inspiring. So thanks a lot for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. This is stuff I've been working on for a while, and I really wanted to share it. So
yeah.
So thank you for giving me that opportunity to share it, because I would still share it even if nobody was here, but I wouldn't be as satisfied.
No.
Okay. So
okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm going to close off the broadcast now. So thank you, everybody. We still have some viewers, which is great. We had people commenting, which is great. I take the criticism of fix the chat window. I'll have to figure out how to do that, but yeah, good point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to do that. We will be rejoined by Amy Burval. She's got a teaching assignment, so she's not available during the week, but she will be with us on Saturday, this coming Saturday at noon. And we'll be talking about creativity and experience and all of that other stuff. And then our final hangout of the course will actually be a bit early. It's tentatively, because I still haven't confirmed everything, but tentatively scheduled for next Tuesday. And that'll be the session on agency, and we'll be welcoming, and I'm just trying to look it up in a hurry because I've forgotten the names. I'm sorry. Yes, Sylvia Balderas from Colombia, and Yuta Trevoranis from Toronto here in Canada. And that will actually get us representation. It'll complete the representation, I think, from every continent except Antarctica in the course, for those of you who are worried about diversity in the course. I always worry about diversity, and I did try to go for as much diversity as I could get. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Roland, for joining me in the Hangout, and we'll see you all next time. I'm Stephen Downs. Bye.